Good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. This is episode 62, and we're joined by a repeat guest. Her name is Ashaki Nichols. You all probably remember her from episode 27. She's running as an independent under the Redemption Party banner for President of the United States in 2024. She currently lives in the Atlanta metro area, based in the Atlanta area. She's a paralegal, has a master's degree in administration, and we're going to talk a lot about her policies. I encourage my audience again to go back and listen to that episode 27. It's very informative. And I encourage you to do that for all of the interviews, a lot of the repeat guests, so we don't have to keep getting everyone up to par. But go back, watch the episode 27. I encourage everyone. And then this context makes a lot more sense than episode 62. But I want to say, Ashaki Nichols, welcome back to the show. And we appreciate you accepting the invitation again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be back.
Yes, and as I was saying, we talked about quite a bit on the episode 27, but before we get into this wonderful episode 62, I'm not doubting at all that it's going to be just as great, if not better, than episode 27. This advertisement is brought to you by Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. I just want to say thanks to all the listeners and the viewers. I will reiterate that we are trying to go more on the YouTube video archives direction. That's not to say that we're going to get rid of the audio podcasting version of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum, but simply that per request of so many listeners and viewers, the people prefer the videos, but I will keep the pod version, the audio version available for people who are driving back and forth to work in their commutes and traffic because they do like to hear it as opposed to watching the videos. But I am going to emphasize more the YouTube component. So if you are subscribed to Spotify or any of the audio platforms, consider subscribing for free to the YouTube platform. And it's always going to be free. As I've told on a couple of episodes now, I've been trying to push it a little bit more. I don't want your money. I just want this information to be shared more to help some of the smaller YouTube channels out there. And we have gone a long way. We've reached 77 different countries. So this is quite an international podcast. Domestic and international go together. We may talk about that some today, but this is a world together. We live together, and we can't see ourselves as separately. The more we know about the local, the more we should know about the global and national. But that's all I say about that. Again, I appreciate my audience that's growing, and we want to keep this a public service. So let's just subscribe for free. I don't want any of your money. That's what I'm concerned about more. So I'm an educator. So let's get the ideas out and let's talk to different types of people and not worry so much about getting monetized this, monetized that. I wanted to ask Ms. Nichols before we start. You mentioned the Rice Awards, and you're presenting an award today. Can you tell the audience what that's about?
Yes, so the Rice Awards, this will be the 13th annual version of that award show. And what it does is it recognizes individuals within the community that are supporting our community, growing, building our community, whether that be within politics or outside of politics. So the award that I will be presenting tonight is called the Torch Award, and it's Together Our Resources Can Help. So really looking at how individuals individually have helped the community and how they actually impact the community as a whole.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And you say 13 years this is going on.
Yeah,
And
this is their 13th year.
is this directed towards like local business leaders, economic leaders? Like who exactly received these awards?
So there are individuals from charitable organizations, church organizations, political organizations. They run the gamut pretty much. One of the award recipients, she's a 7-time Olympic gold medalist. I won't say gold medalist, but she's an Olympian 7 times, and she's traveled the world running track. So that's just one of the recipients that we have, and she works in the public sector helping individuals. So yeah, it's really amazing just to see how much people affect our community and how much they have a passion to want to affect the community in a positive way.
You're based in the Atlanta area. How long have you been in the Atlanta area? Because I know we talked a little bit about your bio the last
Mhm.
episode.
Yes, so I lived in Atlanta from about 2006 to 2010. Then I relocated back to California. Then my oldest daughter had my grandson, and she asked me if I would relocate back here to Georgia. So I moved back in 2017, and I've been here ever since.
And so that was more or less a setup question because 2017, so you're very much in the know when it comes to Atlanta Metro affairs. We never talked about this, but I wanted to get your view on this. As a matter of fact, I don't even think I mentioned it on the forum because at one point it was so saturated, it was so saturated in the news. The whole idea of the Stop Cop City and the defending Atlanta forest. I thought it would be appropriate just to ask you, since you're in the area, like what has been kind of the reception of that, and do you have any personal view towards it, either way or the other?
Well, the thing about it is the Atlanta metro area has grown exponentially. It's just since I was here, then I left, and then I came back. Within that 7-year time frame, at that time, the population was growing. And even since I've returned, it's grown even more. There are just these skyscrapers and different things. And I look at the city and I'm going, my cute little wonderful small city is turning into a metropolis. And so a lot of the residents that are within the city of Atlanta, within Fulton County, they want to maintain some of that small town feel, and bringing in Cop City, which it's basically a training metroplex for officers. In my opinion, we have enough land space within Georgia, just like, most states do, where they could actually put a training facility, in my opinion, that wouldn't disrupt the community, wouldn't disrupt, citizens. And I think it would be better in my opinion, it would be better well resourced outside of the city, as opposed to taking up some of the fewer green spaces that are left for residents to just relax and be around, than to build I want to say a training multiplex that they are trying to do. My daughter is definitely against Cop City because what it does is it consolidates all of this training resource in one place. Okay, that's fine. But then when is that going to be used for? Is that going to be used to lock down the city at one point? Do you really need that type of consolidation in one area that's already oversaturated?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I've tried to get a few people to come on to talk about it, unsuccessfully, but because they're different, it's really a decentralized movement that's going on,
Yeah.
and you have different types of activist groups in and out. And this is really in response to a lot of the police brutality cases, especially that summer of 2020. And then you had the
Mhm.
Rayshard Brooks incident, and you've had other incidents of police brutality just in the Atlanta metro area. So I can only imagine how that's adding more fuel to this project.
Yeah. Yeah. The community policing has been lost, and it is an art. It truly, truly is. I have a relative in Indiana who's a police officer, and it's interesting because I'll go different places and I'll just get in conversations with people, and then somehow I end up talking about my cousin, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I know him, and he helped me here, and he did this," and I'm like, he sounds like this superhero, in my opinion, in this city, but he understands how to, I guess, really have that relationship with the community. And it's a good thing because when something's wrong and when something happens, those individuals will call him and they'll come to him, or they'll come to the police force that they have and say, "Hey, this doesn't look right. This is happening. Can you guys come help us?" And then it's this relationship that's symbiotic with the community and the police officers, because they're supposed to be peace officers. They're not supposed to lord it over the community that they serve, and that's been lost. And just not a soapbox here, but there have been other officers from other states and other cities, and they've lost their jobs for a reason, but then they come to states like Florida and they come to states like Georgia. And even though they have a tattered background that they somehow still get into a position of law enforcement. And I think that's one thing that we really need to start looking at. When people have a background that is not suitable for a community officer or a peace officer, then they do not need to work anymore in that capacity because something happened, something went wrong. And because when they get supported to work in a policing environment, even though they've had bad behavior, it just instills and enforces their bad behavior. And that's something that needs to stop.
Yes, we discussed this quite a bit, episode 27. We went pretty into depth with your views on policing, and we had a good exchange and conversation in that regards. When you say community policing, that definitely that sounds like a more, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like a more mainstream version of let's get back to people who are from the community that has that, as you mentioned, a symbiotic relationship with the people because there's a recognition, there's a familiarity, and I think that calms the community. I think a lot of people would agree with that assessment. And you have one of your opponents, your political opponents, means community policing, but I think they mean it in a completely different way than you do, the way you mentioned it. And we're referring to Jasmine Sherman, who I just interviewed recently. I interviewed Jasmine um, around the same time I'd interviewed you in your first episode, but it sounds like there's two different things. Your type of community policing is something that's more so um, an officer that has connection with the community, because you just alluded to the fact that you have these people coming in from out of state, even with a terrible track record, and they're able to get job and employment.
Yeah.
But will you go any further than that? But that, or do you think that that's pretty much where we need to, the direction we need to go is more so, let's get back to that type of community policing, as opposed to what Jasmine is proposing, which is having the citizens themselves in the neighborhood police themselves?
Mhm.
What will be your issues with something with that type of approach?
I think we could do both. We could have a hybrid because when I grew up, we had, I guess, Citizens Watch was what we had in California, and there are different communities that have different names for it. But there were basically point representatives within the neighborhoods, and they were the main point of contact with your sheriffs and your local law enforcement. So again, if something was happening, they saw something, they said something. But the citizens outside of that really didn't say much. Whereas what I'm talking about with more of the community involvement, and I think this is also to Jasmine's point too, officers need to be seen and not seen when something's wrong, right? They need to be seen when there's nothing wrong, just walking their beat or shaking hands. And, I don't want to say you got to go play basketball with in the community, but what I am saying is it's okay to just walk down the street and say, hey, I just want to let you know I'm officer so and so. I work between these hours and these hours. If anything's going on, definitely please reach out because we're here to serve you in the community. We don't have that anymore because law enforcement has been trained. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's just a culture, but they've been trained that the citizens are beneath them and they need to lord it over the citizens to keep citizens in control. And that's just not what policing is. And with Jasmine, she wants it to where the communities police themselves. And I hear where she's coming from. My concern is because everybody's got one, there's always going to be a bully, right? That comes in and says, well, I want to do things this way. You better listen to me or I'm going to send my thugs out to get you. That's not what we want. We want respect amongst communities. We do not want to create more factions. So like I said, I think it can be, a little bit of both. We don't need to be extreme one way or the other because guess what? One model might work well in one neighborhood or community, and another model might work well in a different community. Because with policing, it's not a one size fits all. I lived in Irvine and they just weren't having it. It's a Stepford community. Okay. You have an accident, there's glass broken, there's oil on the street. 5-10 minutes, it's gone. Like it never happened. Okay, the cars are gone, the oil's gone, the glass is gone, and traffic is going on as normal. Like, but that's their city model. That is their pattern. That's their design. Now, that may not work in Atlanta, right? It's a great model, but it may not work somewhere else. So that's what I'm referring to.
So yeah, and I think that that's always going to be an issue with most social issues, most environmental issues. The geography is always going to play a factor into this. Every zip code is different, every situation is different, and so we may not be able to apply the same type of system across the board. So that's always a danger, I think, and maybe the consideration needs to be there for a more nuanced perspective and hybrid. So hybrid community policing, that's an interesting
Yeah.
idea. I've never really heard about that before. I've heard one way or the other, but not more so a hybrid. So that's
Oh, yeah.
interesting to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Because now I think policing they're understanding more that sometimes you need to bring a therapist instead of a gun to a phone call. And so they're trying to train now more individuals that can deal with people that may be having a manic episode, or they're in a state of depression where things go sideways, but they're not threatening to the point where there needs to be a gun. There
Hmm.
are police officers that aren't trained. They're trained to de-escalate, but they are not trained therapists. So when I say hybrid, I'm talking about hybrid all the way across the board. Yeah.
There was a situation, there was a video circulating around last week. I don't know how old it was, but I think the gentlemen were in Vietnam. And they basically, the person walked into the police precinct and had a knife. They pulled the knife out when they were, I say they're about 15 feet away from the officer. The officer was standing up, and the gentleman was like obviously going under mental anguish. Like he was visibly frustrated and
Right.
upset. And the officer was talking to him. Don't know what was said, but kept talking to him, kept talking to him. And he was crying. He eventually handed the knife over to the officer, and the officer gave him a big hug.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how realistic that is, but
Right.
I think that kind of goes to your point. Sometimes you don't even need this excessive force when
Right.
that's not even the situation.
Exactly. Sometimes that man, he just needed to be heard. He needed somebody to listen to him, because men don't always cry. So if it brought him to tears, then he was like, I needed somebody to hear me. I don't
Hmm.
want to do this. I don't want to be violent, but I don't think I'm going to get the attention that I need unless I do this action. And that's unfortunate that we've gotten that way into our society, that people have to be so extreme just to be listened to and heard.
And just to solidify the conclusion of this story, I think the backstory is that someone has stolen the person's guitar, and it was like their livelihood pretty much. And the police officer that hugged him was actually played guitar too, and so he actually gave him a guitar after
Wow.
that ended. So yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that I thought that was a pretty cool story to share, and
Wow,
thought it was
that's good.
relevant with the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even if it wasn't real, right, we can still take the case study and look at that, because there are situations that are like that, where again, somebody needs to be heard. They need to be listened to, and they don't need to be talked at, but talked to.
Hmm.
So,
Absolutely. I wanted to share something with your audience. I think it's noteworthy to bring up the redemption party for people who may not have tuned into episode 27. When I go, there's a separate site from the Ashaki Nichols for President site, and you stress fiscal responsibility, limited federal government, constitutional sovereignty. What does that mean to people who are trying to understand what is the position of the redemption party? Like, what do those three things mean?
right. So starting with fiscal responsibility, we have really overspent, and Right now, we are, let's see, I want to say next week, they need to raise the debt ceiling so that our country is not thrown into crisis and government workers are going to be furloughed like we had about 10 years ago, which is interesting because 10 years ago, the same thing happened when they kind of kicked the can down the road and they waited till the last minute. And they are making it very political. If nobody can see they're making it political, they're probably under a rock at this point in life. But looking at, okay, they need to raise the debt ceiling, right? But they're looking at a contingency plan that even if they don't, and they have to kick it down the road a little bit more, they want to still do the funding for Ukraine. And I found that interesting. And the reason why I find that interesting is because the American people didn't sign up to fund Ukraine. And that's where I'm talking about fiscal responsibility. We are right now in, unfortunately, we're a proxy war that became a war. And people have lost their lives, lost their homes, lost their livelihood, and we're funding it. But we'll, in the same breath, say, well, we don't have enough money to deal with our homeless, but we're giving $7,000 a month to individuals that are here illegally in Chicago. And we are also giving $10,000 a month to those same types of individuals in New York City, but we have homeless veterans and we have a huge homeless problem along with mental health and drug addiction. But we're sending billions of dollars overseas. We're spending billions of dollars on people that are not here legally. That's not being responsible. And that's what I'm talking about. It is time for our legislatures, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the president. It's time to get back to being responsible with the funds of the American public, because there's only so much debt you can have. And unfortunately, we are at a point where our dollar isn't as valuable as it was before. You know, there are a lot more countries signing on to BRICS. I don't know if a lot of people have heard about that. We've also got the CBDC right around the corner that they want to use. And my thoughts on the CBDC are it violates the Fourth Amendment. It violates your right to privacy of how you spend your money, how you get your money. You know, for somebody to be on the back end and say, well, I'm just not going to spend any money because I didn't like the tweet that you sent last week, or I'm going to demote you because you did a certain activity. That's slavery. And that's not what we're going back to. We are a free country. We have a republic. And I need people to hold on to that, because I know we talk about we have a democracy, there's democracy. We have a republic that has a democratic process, right? Which means, hey, if you got 10 people in a room and you've got 8 that vote one way and to the other way, you go with the 8, right? You go with the majority rule in a smaller voting realm, but we're still a republic, which means it's governed by the people, not the government. And that's it. I hope that answers the question with fiscal responsibility. We're spending other people's money. I don't want to say like a drunken sailor. I want to put it more like we've just gone on a shopping spree, because the credit card is great and it's a black card and it just has like this limited amount of funds, and we're like, oh, we spent too much. Well, no, we didn't. Let's just increase our limit and let's just keep going. Let's just keep this riding, and that just needs to stop.
Well, you hit on so many issues there with monetary policy, and we've talked about quite a bit of these issues. You mentioned BRICS, those implications on the de-dollarization efforts with the multipolar world forming with Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Now you got 6 other countries joining January 1st, 2024. Oil enriched countries, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia joining, Iran's joining, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina. So 6 strategic countries joining the BRICS in 2024, January the 1st. And then you have the U.S. economy, which is just, like you mentioned, the debt is just, when is this going to end? It just doesn't end. The military industrial complex is so strong. You alluded to it with the Ukraine spending. Now with the Ukraine support, giving so much money to Ukraine, we now spend more money than the the next 10 countries combined just on military spending. So you ask yourself, is Ukraine the 51st state now, unofficially? And and a lot of people who are on board with this Ukraine situation, I've never been on board with it from the get go, because um, not only just from an economic standpoint, but I feel like people are picking and choosing, and it is dehumanizing. War is dehumanizing, and we create this thing, Russia versus Ukraine. So you mean to tell me Russian citizens are mean people? They're not good people, but Ukrainian citizens are all good people? Like, why are we making this between people choosing a side? And but that's what governments do. They justify this by any means, and I think it's unfortunate that people who have fallen for this, we're saving democracy when we don't even have a democracy ourselves. And the question I guess I would have is, we can't afford the money. Do people really believe that Ukraine's going to be able to pay those loans back? They haven't even paid the loans back from the 2014 IMF loans, the two that they got sent. And I just don't think people are using their brains properly. And they're being just led astray by the military industrial complex.
Yeah, yeah, it's very unfortunate that this is happening, because when we started and it was in the proxy war situation, and I had just started my campaign out, I stated I don't want to see another Vietnam. And what I meant by that is that we sent individuals over to a country, really, I don't want to say for no reason, but there really wasn't a reason for us to be there, if that makes sense. It wasn't necessary for us to get involved. And then you find out about all the atrocities that happened afterwards. And you want to demonize, again, to your point, the people that were over there caught up in this conflict. And it's like, okay, then why were we there in the first place? What were we doing? You spent billions of dollars, lost millions or thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives. And for what? To demonize the people that came back home, to say that they weren't heroes when they saw things that they can never unsee, and you want to spit on them, and they serve this country. Like, it's horrible, the things that happen then. And I don't want to see that happen again with this situation, because guess what? We could spend all this money, leave, the way we're supposed to. You can't just leave a country. You have to leave slowly. They'll still fight. They will still be arguing over this territory, even if we leave. I just need people to understand that. They were fighting before we got there. They'll be fighting after we leave. It's not our house. It's not our responsibility. It's no one's responsibility. It's the responsibility of the leaders that are at that border. And they need to get it taken care of. Poland just decided, they're like, we're done with this nonsense. And they are correct. And everybody else needs to get on that page and sit Zelensky and Putin down and say, work this out. Stop your fighting and your arguing, because there's no winners here. There are no winners in war, not ever. And then we as the United States, we need to stop supplementing it and supplying it.
And with these issues, they are complex because there's way more than meets the eye. Especially when you have the whole idea of a bureaucracy, leadership. Who is actually running the country is a big question, because I know that the president gets a lot of esteem and recognition and notoriety, but the president has a cabinet. The president has people directing things around, but under the table, around the table, above the table. And Zelensky, to be fair, Zelensky was willing to come, and Putin were about to make a deal.
Yeah.
What happened, I have no clue. Like, I'm not going to speculate. I know I've had people come on and discuss what really happened. Boris Johnson apparently went, and so that kind of derailed the situation. Boris Johnson's not even in power anymore at the UK. So everyone have their moneyed interests. They have these different interests, not in peace, but they have interests to, I guess it's strategic to these people who are really calling the shots. And they don't have any interest in making peace, but they have interest in making money off of these conflicts.
Yeah, and that's what happens. All else go to war. You will find, I mean, you could probably type that in Google, all else go to war, and there will be so many politicians that come up, advisors and different things like that. I think I saw a video at one time. He said, there was nothing going on, so we just created a conflict in Iran because, if you want to make some money, you go to war. So you're making weapons and you're creating conflict that is sustainable, in the sense that you can have now all these defense contracts and these government contracts and everything else that's working. There is, I want to say, like, the government contract realm, it's like a separate economy almost, if you can get one of those government contracts. And full disclosure, I am a small business. I have not gotten a government contract, but I am signed up to, apply for one. And I got I got a couple emails this week, and they were looking in the state of Georgia just for temporary administrative services, which is something that my company provides and offers. I haven't gotten approved for it, but just to use that as an example, there are ways to make money with the government, but I think it's gotten to a point where it's, how should I say, they can pull the strings when they need to pull the strings to make the money. Right? Because nobody wants to really be in and go to war and be in constant conflict. But you're like, but if I can make weapons and I can get a government contract with this company, and then I can get this country to sign into this contract, you know what I'm saying? And it just keeps going, and it just keeps perpetuating, and it becomes a business model. And that's what it shouldn't be. War should not be a business model, but it is.
Well said. And I wanted to also, you emphasize that we've lost manufacturing in this country. Oh, and one more thing aside, this also doesn't even emphasize the fact that you have the Maui disaster, you have the East Palestine disaster, you have the Jackson, Mississippi, the water crisis. You have all these environmental crises, and we have a manufacturing base that has pretty much left the country. Um, so we have things going on here that aren't even really being paid attention to because of our interest, making money in countless, endless wars. But I wanted to get your view on how does that correlate with fiscal responsibility, the manufacturing emphasis? Like, how would that correlate with being responsible fiscally?
Yes. So it correlates because we need to start making things again from this country. We do make small things, but not at the level that it was, like steel, aluminum, copper, the wiring. I mean, we do have the Chips Act, sorry, that has been introduced. I want to say it was last year and a half ago, somewhere around in there. But that's still going to take time to build up those factories to actually start pushing that out. Whereas, where are you going to get some of the wiring that you need to actually make these chips? Are we going to start making steel and aluminum and copper again? I'm mentioning those because, like I said, they do go into electronics. And what happens is we have to import some of those items that have been exported to other countries to make, because yes, it's cheaper to make them there, but then you get a cheap product. So what do you want? Do you want it, like cheap on cheap on cheap? It's like, no, there's got to be quality somewhere. And so those are the types of jobs that I'm talking about bringing back. We have the infrastructure. We have the factories. They're just sitting there, abandoned. I've seen them. I've driven across this country several different times. And for some of the states that I've driven through, I've seen those manufacturing plants. So it's not like we can't, we can. And it's a matter of bringing back that respect of hard work and owning it and raising your family. That's why, I don't want to get into immigration too hard and mix that up with the economy, but they kind of go hand in hand. You don't want slave labor, right? Which is what's happening when you do bring in people from another country that don't speak the language, and they've already broken the law by coming here, but it's being allowed by our federal government, and it's going to drive down wages. And then when we're starting to look like a third world country, they'll be like, well, what happened to the United States? what happened to that city on the hill. We can still be the city on the hill, but we have to go, okay, stop. There's a better way, there's a better process. And breaking the law and expecting the law to protect you is not the way. Economically, we really have to get back to manufacturing, getting the jobs where they need to be. You know, the UAW, they're fighting for their workers right now with the car companies. And I find it interesting because I was listening to a little bit of Pete Buttigieg as he was giving his feedback to Congress, and he was talking about all the subsidies that they're giving the car companies to do what they need to do. I'm like, okay, so you've got a car company that's making record profits, but they're being subsidized by the government. You've got workers that are saying, hey, we need a little bit of increase in wages, but guess what? Those same workers can't even afford to purchase the cars that they're helping to build. And you're still giving subsidies to that same company that has record profits. I mean, you make it make sense. It doesn't. It doesn't make any sense at all. But you want everybody to be happy with it. Even if you did raise their wages, hear me. We are subsidizing the car companies to make these electric cars that not a lot of people can afford. What are we doing? Yeah, it sounds insane when I say it slow. It does. It's like, we're not crazy people, but it sounds like it.
There's so much you said there. And then you have the UAW. I think they've already endorsed Biden, which doesn't make any sense at all to me.
But I understand why, because he supports unions. I'm not saying
I
don't.
Does he support unions?
He does support unions. They do. But like I said, the union is working for the worker, but the government is still subsidizing the car company. They're still getting their money on the back end, and they'll get those subsidies regardless because they're making these EVs. But they're not going to, in fact, translate that money to the workers. And my whole thing is this: okay, if you get the subsidy, make sure those workers get their raises, because if they don't get their raises, you don't get the subsidies. I mean, that sounds fair to me. Anybody else? Because see, what they do is they say, oh yeah, we'll give, we'll pass this down to the employees, and they say, well, we'll increase your benefits. You're not doing that. We'll give you more days off. You're not doing that. All the things you say you're going to do with that money, you say you're going to give it back to the workers, but you don't give it back to them in monetary funding. Like tangible, here is your raise, here is your bonus, because we made record profits. Here's your cut. You're not doing that.
I guess the reason why I was saying more so about the Biden perspective, and you can apply the same with Trump, is that the difference is that I don't think the Trumplicans, the Republicans, whatever you want to call them, they don't hide or they don't disguise the fact that they don't support the unions. But Biden, you notice like every time they strike, he breaks them up. That's what I mean. To me, I almost compare it with blacks supporting the Democratic Party. Sure, yeah, they support Biden. Does Biden support the black people in the Democratic Party, or is it the other way around? Because, and then you also have the union dynamic with the bosses who have more control than others. And I feel like the workers are always stranded, and then the people in the hierarchy benefit from that, whoever, in whatever system it is.
Yeah. And that's the thing about unions, right? If you're in a good union, they're fighting for you. If you're in a bad union, they're fighting for themselves, and then you're getting whatever else is left over. And then the flip side with the Republicans, it's like, okay, they don't support the unions, but they want the trickle-down economics, because they assume that the companies, when they get the record profits, right, are going to share those profits with their employees, and they don't. And so all we have are just horrible people. I'm just sorry. I mean, just flat out, you just got horrible people that want to pay slave wages and keep the money for themselves. I'm not against capitalism. Everybody can do their thing, but treat your employees with respect. And then workers work for people who are going to respect you, right? But then that limits the job pool. So there's got to be that balance. And like I said, if EV companies are going to get supplemented by the government, then that money should be translating into a paycheck for a worker. Their wages shouldn't go down, they should go up. And they shouldn't be taxed higher than they're being taxed. They should be getting that government benefit, right? Because their company is getting that benefit. It shouldn't just be going to the company's bottom line.
I was talking again to Jasmine Sherman, and I was trying to point out the internal contradictions with the environmental movements. And I honestly, at this point, because the show is really not about me, even though I have certain views and I incorporate them in the conversation in the way that we discuss it. But I think it's ambiguous at this point, the environmental movements, because on one hand, if we're going to bring back jobs to this country, and most people seem to agree that that's what we need to do, then there's going to be some environmental contradiction. And I guess the question is, how do we weigh those contradictions versus the potential benefit of extracting the oils? Because you make it pretty straightforward. Like, we need to proceed with the oil drilling, and then you have people saying we need to stop all these projects, all these pipelines and stuff. How do we balance the two out? Is there a way to do that?
Yes, I think there is. I think we definitely have clean coal. We have actually most of the cleaner refineries in the world, as opposed to other countries, because we have taken it seriously when it does come to waste. With the oil drilling, we have renewable. What we have to get away from is the fracking. It's the fracking that has caused an issue where, people run their water and you can put a lighter next to it and it can become flammable. That's not good for anyone. So that's something we need to stay away from. But outside of that, we need to look at some of the more renewable, sustainable energies. I know that Jasmine talks about using hemp oil. My concern is, will a car actually have a retrofit for a grade of that oil? Or does that mean that we have to start making cars that can allow for multiple types of oil, even if it's not a crude-based oil, right? So then that comes in technology, and now you've got some R&D and you can look at that, because we do have more sources of energy that are available to us, but our government doesn't allow them because they want to figure out how to monetize it and how to actually tax it and use it, again, not against the people, but they really want to keep, unfortunately, the public underfoot. Because if I can limit the amount of energy that you can use, turn it on and off with the switch, then you are at my behest. And that's what's happening right now, because everybody's like, we got to go to electric. Okay, it's interesting, because if you live in California, they have rolling blackouts. So what happens when you need to actually charge up your EV vehicle, right? You got to charge it up, and there's a rolling blackout in West Hollywood. What are you going to do? Sit there 2-3 hours, maybe 8, to wait? Because the EV station is not at your house. It's in some random location. And you never know when there's going to be a rolling blackout, because guess what? There are too many people on the grid. You want everybody on the grid, but then everybody can't be on the grid because you're stressing the grid. So what are we really doing? We are not giving people choices. We have choices, we have options, and we need to exercise all of them without, exhausting one another. Right now, our oil reserve is like half of what it was before. We had 700 billion barrels. I think we're under 350 billion barrels. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot to people, but that's a substantial amount. And we have really stopped our oil production in the way that we have been doing it, because we were dependent and then we were independent. And now we're back to being dependent, because people say, oh, we've got to be on, everything's got to be electric or solar or wind turbine. And wind and solar are great, but they are not as efficient and effective as coal and oil. There is safe nuclear energy. I actually had somebody send me some information on different energy outlets. I want to study it more before I mention it, but we do have more options out there. So I want everybody to know we've got options. We need to exhaust those options and resources, because right now you've got a small cartel, and I'm going to call them that, a small cartel of energy producers that are trying to corral everyone into one area of energy, which is electricity. And then you've got the oil companies that cry, oh no, you're going to impede on our money, so we're going to charge people more. And then we're going to talk about all the record profits we have. Really? You're being horrible again. But it's about greed. It's not really about helping the American people.
And there's the extractive industries, and there's a lot that goes into this too. Even the electric vehicles you talked about, those products have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And Dr. Carr, who's the author of Cobalt Red, I'm going to try to get Dr. Carr onto the forum, and that will kind of contextualize a lot of this these internal contradictions with this environmentally conscious crowd. And I don't mean to use that in a bad way, because I think a lot of people do have their heart in the right direction. But we also need to not contradict ourselves either when we talk about saving the environment. Like, what exactly does that mean? You have a lot of greenwashing going on. You have a lot of green capitalism going on. The same people who are saying one thing, it's like, okay, if you're okay with capitalism, fine. If you're not, that's fine too. But let's just be consistent in the arguing. That's the only thing I say. I'm not gonna side with either line of thought. Just as the presenter right now, I'm just simply posing the question. Let's not be so contradictory, and let's think things through and talk to different types of people about this intersectional environment, making money, doing this, doing that. I mean, it's not as easy as people make it seem. If it was that easy, it would have already been done, or there would have been significant headwinds already. I just think that these are serious systemic problems, and I think it takes a lot of collaboration to make it work out. It's not going to be a one-fix solution.
No. That's why I said it's going to take multiple solutions to get it done. But at the end of the day, it really comes back to, okay, we've got corporations that are large corporations that are, unfortunately polluting the environment, but then they've got other agencies, governmental agencies and legislatures working with them to pass bills and laws so that they can continue what they're doing, right? So it all comes full circle again back to the government. The government has to be responsible for what they're doing and how they're acting, but they're being bad actors when they're actually supporting corporations that don't want to do right by the American public, when they are dumping toxic waste into the environment. Because I'm not going to say that doesn't happen. It does happen. But those same agencies that sometimes cry, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, those are the same agencies that are on their payroll of these corporations that are being allowed to dump these chemicals. And then you've got legislatures behind those agencies that are writing bills to make it okay. Then on top of that, you've got Supreme Court justices. They got justices in their pockets. Okay, Clarence Thomas is just, I don't even want to go there, but I'm just saying, everybody, it's a cartel. It's called racketeering. And they want to point the finger at everybody else. They want to always talk about the cartels in Mexico, and that we have them, multiple groups of them in our own government. Okay. FBI was put in place to deal with the RICO Act. We got a situation here in Georgia with the Voting RICO Act, but it's not just voting that RICO Act was supposed to be in place for. It was basically in place for racketeering and squeezing people out so that they could not be in competition. And it happens every day in this country. And we have legislatures that support it. And so we just need to start calling people out. We need to stop putting people in office that don't want to work for the American people.
You mentioned a livable wage in your site, and I wanted to kind of clear that up. What does a livable wage mean in a Nichols administration? And what exactly is this fair tax act that you propose as well?
Right. So a livable wage means that we need to really look at the cost of living wages that, unfortunately, if you looked at a graph, it's like wages go up like this and then the cost of living is like up here. There was a point in time where, you were supposed to spend like, I think about 20% of your paycheck on your rent. And now that's up to maybe 30-40% because the wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. You wonder, okay, why is that? There's no longer going to be a middle class. We're just going to have rich and poor people. And that's what we have right now. So a livable wage looks like companies having a cost of living wage. So they do not necessarily have to give anybody raises, right? But when it comes to cost of living, they do have to keep up with that. And that's not going to be a government subsidy. I really think that we need to look at corporations and ask them, why aren't you paying your employees? It's not so much what they're worth, but a wage where they can actually live. There are people in California that are making maybe $85,000, $90,000 a year, and they're living in their car because they might have one eviction because they had lost a job and they didn't have a supplement to bridge them to their next job. But now they got a job that's almost 6 figures and they're living in their car. Are you kidding me? Because they can't get another apartment because they have an eviction. But we won't talk about other people that can cross the border and get everything that they need. But these are the things that need to change within our society in the United States, really. So there's that. there's that soapbox with the livable wage. And then your next question
I was
was
more so the fair tax,
the fair tax. Yes. So with the fair tax, it's looking at being taxed one time. And that's on either a good or service. And when I say a good, you buy a car, you're taxed one time. Buy a house, you buy a good or service, and you're taxed that one time with a purchase, as opposed to being taxed when you make your paycheck, then you purchase, then you have to pay taxes at the end of the year and account for that. It's overtaxing, and it's time to just have a fair tax, and we can do it. And I know a lot of people say, well, we're just going to lose a ton of money. We're not going to lose a ton of money because we have consumers in this country. So calm down. But what's not going to happen is, are we going to have a completely overblown defense budget where people can just lose $6 billion and not know what happened to it? Yeah. There's that. I don't think that's going to be happening. I think people are going to be a little bit more responsible and accountable. But we can do a fair tax, and we should, because there's no reason why we have to be taxed multiple times and levels. I mean, you're taxed when you pay a phone bill. You're taxed when you go get gas in your car. And I'm like, okay, I get it. But if you're going to do that, then stop taking it out of my paycheck. Okay? If you're going to do that, stop asking me to fill out a form and pay taxes at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm looking at. Yeah.
Just to clarify with time constraints, do you have 15 more minutes in you, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to make sure, because I know I can wander off and then the hour goes to 2 and it's like, oh gosh, what happened? But this is great. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I wanted to tell the audience to please go back and listen to that episode or watch episode 27 with Ashaki Nichols. The reason why I say it is because a lot of her commentary will make more sense if people do that, and we don't rush to judgment with people's views. Because the reason why I say is because when I first looked at your immigration policy, I had maybe a picture of what you were going to say, but when you actually explained it, it wasn't what I thought it was initially. So that's what I'm saying. We can't judge people based on comments. We have to really contextualize everything. And so I encourage people to go watch that first episode, because we're not going to talk about immigration on this one, just so we don't have to keep going back and forth about that. And I think your views are very well established at this point. Um, I want to save the last 15 minutes to talk some about this idea of voting and the intersection of that with Black people, especially. And I wanted to also address this issue with the anti-hate bill, the anti-Black hate bill that you proposed, because May 2021, Biden signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which was supposed to be an anti-Asian hate crime bill.
Mhm.
And Black people were wondering, not even before the summer of 2020, but just throughout the history of the country with the slave patrols and everything else,
Mhm.
why hasn't there been any such bill passed for Black people? Just with the political power, the presence, all the representation, you have the pretty Congressional Black Caucus, you have all these different window dressing type of strategies, is what I call them. But what are the tangibles? And there hasn't been an anti-Black hate bill passed. What would that mean in your administration? What exactly does that mean, an anti-Black hate crime bill?
Yes, so my proposal is for a reparations act that includes an anti-Black hate crime bill, very similar to the Federal Reserve Act. We need an act that encompasses and actually lays out most of the atrocities that have been done to Black people that will no longer be tolerated in this country. See, we've gotten the apology for slavery, we've got the Emancipation Proclamation. However, after Restoration, people have been treated like slaves, even though they have not had chains on their hands or their feet. We have to remember that slavery is still in the 13th Amendment. If you are incarcerated, you are then deemed a slave, and they use that labor for companies. And people need to really kind of wrap their heads around that for a second and understand that Black people are at a higher incarceration rate than any other ethnicity in this country. Is there a reason for that? Is there a reason that maybe slavery never ended? It was just amended. If everybody can just wrap their heads around that. Because if it was truly ended, it wouldn't be in our Constitution. There'd be no place for it. There's no right for it. But they put that there. And then when somebody else suffers behind it, they kind of get offended. But it's like, you put it here. It sits here for everyone. And unfortunately, everyone has become subject to it. With voting rights, I want to make sure that voters, how should I say it, that they're confident when they go to the ballot box, that they're not concerned about their vote mattering or counting. I live here in Georgia, and they are proposing paper ballots. And I've, stated my case. My concern is ballot stuffing if you have paper ballots. Other people have concerns of, the Dominion machines. Trust me, I would like it if you could just vote on your phone. Honestly, I really do. But then what are we going to do when people start, farming phones from one location because they want their person to win? We have to respect the vote. And I don't know what the best path forward is, but I know what we need to start is making sure that the American people are confident that their vote matters, it counts, and it's safe. And that is the job right now of our local, state, and federal officials. It's your job to secure the votes of the American people. And this is within all 50 states. And if you cannot secure those ballots, if there are any improprieties going on in your state, you need to find it, you need to call it out, and you need to make sure that it does not continue to happen. But that's all we can do, really, right? I mean, they have other countries where they dip their finger in ink that stays on their finger for, I guess, maybe a week or two. That lets people know how many people voted. I mean, what is it going to take for us to just respect one another? And I think that's really what we need to get back to with the voting and with the anti-Black hate crime bill. It's just, sad. There was a young woman, I guess she was 13. She got beat up in a Burger King in Los Angeles. And I kept looking at the corner to see if I was familiar with the location or area, but she got beat up by a woman for no reason. And if we had an anti-Black hate crime bill right now, that person would be in jail. The manager who didn't stop the fight would be in jail. And the restaurant would be sued for millions of dollars. Post haste, hands down. All they'd have to do is just fill out the form and it'd be like, this is a hate crime. There was no one instigating it on this young woman's part, and we're done. You about to get hit with, $5-10 million lawsuit. Oh, it would stop real quick. You hit people's pocketbook, it will stop real fast. But that's what I want with the anti-Black hate crime bill. I want remedy. That is what we don't have. We have a hate crime bill. We have an Emmett Till bill. But in the Emmett Till bill, it's still not specific. It says to everybody. I don't know how many other races of people, maybe outside of maybe white people, there were some white people lynched, but predominantly there were Black people that were lynched. So it's like, okay, it was written for us, but at the same time, there's still not really laid out protections and remedies of what we can do if an event occurs. So.
Yes, I brought up the voting rights because honestly, for me, and I may be completely, I guess, misunderstood or even wrong on this assessment. But when I first heard about, you remember the talk when they kept saying the voting rights and Kamala and Joe and all them were kept talking about. To me, I interpreted that as red herring, and I said that because I was thinking just like the people that I know, all the Black people that I've ever talked to. I'm an active voter myself. I don't vote consistently, but I do vote, and I obviously have a voice, and we have voices. But I've never talked to another Black person that had trouble voting. And I'm saying to myself, who are they talking to? Who are these people that they're referring to as far as like they can't vote? And I don't understand what's so wrong about if you're going to line up for hours to vote. What's wrong with someone having an ID when you need an ID to drive a car? You need an ID for all these other things. So what if people do need a required ID? Those are just kind of the things I was thinking initially. And I was also thinking you can register to vote online, but you can't vote online. To me, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right. It's very confusing. But they weren't talking to Black people. They weren't talking to white people. They weren't talking to any citizen that lives in this country. They were talking about individuals that had come over here illegally. And they want it so where people can register the same day and show up, even if they do not have any form of identification, and vote. And that's wrong, because that completely erodes and violates our Constitution and the rights of the people and the will of the people. If you do not have an ID, you cannot vote, because to your point, there's no reason that you can't get one.
And it also raised it made it harsher for people running outside of the blue-red team when it came to signatures and stuff. I don't think people understand that in these bills, they add in other stuff. And a lot of this is driven by the ruling class, which is the Dempublican Party is what I call them.
Yeah.
And so they're presented a certain way, they package it a certain way, but who's going to spend the time to read everything that's in that bill? And that's why I say people really need to be careful, because they only, just like the crime bill, the 1994 crime bill, they emphasized the violence against women portion of it, but they didn't talk about how it increased 100,000 police. They don't emphasize that as much. They don't emphasize the drug, the harshness towards people with the drugs caught on them. They don't emphasize those components of it. They try to cherry pick what they want to pick out of it.
Oh yeah, it was just like with the Inflation Reduction Act that they did. They kept saying, "Oh, we're going to lower drug costs," and nobody wants this done. It's like, no, but then you increase the land lease for the oil companies. So if you do that, who's picking up that tab? Oh, us consumers. So yeah, your drug prices are going to be lower, but how are you going to get them? How are you going to even afford the fuel to put in your car? So, of course, they're not going to mention the horrible parts of the bill. They need to mention the selling points. But that was one of the biggest selling points. The problem with that selling point is when you have to add in transportation costs to that drug that's supposed to be lowered, they're not going to be able to keep it at a low price because somebody's got to pick up that tab at the end of the day. And it's not going to be the government. It's going to be the consumer. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You don't have to apologize.
It's like, sell the truth, don't sell me lies, sell the truth. But that's not what politicians do. And that's one thing I need people to understand. I am not a politician. I am a normal, literally normal, everyday working American that was just like, enough. You need people in there that want to represent. You need people in there that actually care about what happens to America, and they don't want to sit up there and look like a peacock and just kind of fan their feathers and have everybody say, look at me, look at me, look at me. No, you need people in there to do the work.
And just to conclude, where are we sitting right now when it comes to Redemption Party ballot access? How does that work to people who want to consider voting for you?
Yeah, so right now we are working on getting ballot access. Please visit the website. We need as many volunteers as we can all over the country to assist us in getting on the ballot. I want to say there's maybe like 4 or 5 states that we still need to get on before the end of the year, and then the rest we need to get on before May of next year. And it can be done. We just need to rally together. So definitely visit the Redemption Party website at www.redemption-party.com and go ahead and sign up to volunteer and just say, yes, I volunteered to assist with ballot access, and someone will be in contact with you so we can get things coordinated and get on the ballot.
And I was reading one part of, I wanted to depart with 2 questions. One is, you emphasize God a lot on your site. And you said there was a portion where you talked about freedom of religion. Do you propose freedom from religion as well? Is that understood in that, even though there's an emphasis on God, is it understood
Yes.
too that there's freedom from religion as well?
Yes. So I need people to understand. I mention God a lot because I am a Christian. I'm a disciple. I am somebody who follows God. I don't expect other people to. And it's your choice because we do have freedom of religion. And I hear what you're saying. It's like, okay, is everybody going to be overran and overruled by Christianity? No, because see, loving you means doing right by you and respecting you. That means respecting you, right? Respecting your values. But we also have to, make sure that we're respecting our children and we're not showing them things that they probably shouldn't see and having conversations that we probably shouldn't have, and making sure that we're not lying and cheating and stealing from one another. It's making sure that we keeping up with those traditional values, which actually make us a well-rounded country on the hill, right? Where we can be free. I understand that there are people that are Wiccan, that are witches, warlocks, and people that practice polytheism. And, we have a little bit of everything in this country, but at the same time, we need to respect one another's religions. I'm not going to shout you down because you're not going to church. You're not going to church. That's your choice. And that's fine. But I want people to know where I stand.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And I will say that a lot of the candidates that I've interviewed don't really fall into these rabbit holes of culture war, the whole holier than thou, or this identity politics. And there's a difference between identity and identity politics. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
And And I think people need to also be careful with just screaming that every single time. Just because you mentioned culture, individual cultures, you have views about it doesn't make it identity politics necessarily. We have to encourage that so we can understand where we do stand on those types of issues. But I feel like on either of these sides, and when I refer to that, I'm saying liberal versus conservative minded, one side seems to just prejudge the other just right away without sitting down and actually having to talk.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about, these policies, they apply to everybody. They're universal. They don't just apply to one group specifically because, and even if it does apply to one group, it still affects everybody ultimately.
Yeah, it does. And to your point, we've definitely gotten to a lot of culture wars. We've gotten to a point where even here in Atlanta, we have a nomenclature that was disseminated from Mr. Dickens, that is the mayor of Atlanta, where there are certain terms that need to be used and referenced. Let's see, model minority is actually a slur. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh wow.
But yeah, like it's a whole nomenclature book. And it's very interesting, like I said, to me, because we have freedom of speech in this country. And so if you're going to limit my speech, that's interesting because see, I haven't signed up to be a part of the group, right? Like if I'm in a group, you and I were in a group and we have our little lingo back and forth, and then somebody else comes along, what are you guys talking about? It's like, oh, this references this and that references that. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I kind of like that. Can I be a part of your group? Right? If you choose to be a part of the group, that's totally different. But you can't make me be a part of your group and call it, inclusive language under diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not doing that because that's a cult. That's cult mentality. Been there, done that. Nope. No, thank you. No, thank you. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan at all. If anybody, any state, okay, so it's in Atlanta, so it's coming to a state near you. Okay, you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion all the time, but they're coming up with the nomenclature where you have to abide by a certain language. And if not, then there's going to be some type of repercussion behind it. And that makes no sense because we
Doesn't
have
make any sense.
freedom of speech. And
Yeah,
so you're just going to violate the Constitution and say, we're all happy about it. No, we're not. We're not happy about it. I don't know if there'll be any lawsuits coming behind that because he just disseminated it like it was something he could do. But like I said, I really see lawsuits coming behind that only because it's a deprivation of our rights, number one, and number two, it completely violates the First Amendment that we have. So I don't see it going too much further.
And I was pressing Brittany Jones, who's run for president of the United States as an unaffiliated candidate out of the state of Oregon.
Mhm.
And I guess my version of pressing is different than other interviewers because I'm trying to make it a substantive conversation. I'm not trying to grill the person I'm interviewing. I'm just trying to get ideas out that so people can understand those ideas, even though we may have disagreements. But I do disagree with the whole idea of limiting certain group speech. Like even to me, I think when you start saying hate speech, well, what is hate speech to you? I don't think you can really determine it that easily. And I think that's just a precedent to set up. We're going to start censoring other different people's speech because I've seen this happen way too much. I mean, they're doing it right now. How do you control what someone's going to say?
But
I
you're
mean,
not.
it's either it's free speech or it's not free. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Like
I
I'm
mean,
pretty much a maximalist when it comes to that. But
right. I mean, we have the First Amendment for a reason. If our forefathers didn't think freedom of speech was important, they would have never put it in there. It wouldn't be there, and it wouldn't be the first thing there to let you know, like, hey, you're not going to silence the people. Hey, you're not going to tell the people what they can and cannot say. Hey, you're not going to tell the people how to worship. You, government, are not going to do this. It says we the people on that document. It does not say we the government. So we need to understand that, unfortunately, we have organizations like the UN and the WEF, sorry, and the IMF. And these are organizations that really seek to control the populace under what they believe is, oh, we're just going to have this wonderful utopia. No, you're not. Stop that. Leave people alone. Nobody's messing with you. Nobody's kicking sand in your face. Nobody wants your stuff. Now, if you guys want to all go off into the sunset and have your little groups and you're fine, do what you need to do. Just leave everybody else alone. Right? Let us have our freedoms. I don't care what you do over there. Just don't bring it over here. And with diversity, equity, and inclusion, it has infiltrated a lot of corporations. It has infiltrated a lot of municipalities, because they want to control people at the local level. The federal government really can't control people at the local level, but the municipalities can, like your mayors, your commissioners, your city council people. So if you get them all on board with diversity, equity, and inclusion, the way they have it structured goes against our Constitution. So I just need everybody to understand that, because it sounds great, right? You got diversity, you got equity, you got inclusion. It sounds wonderful, but unfortunately, it's a Trojan horse, because behind it and what's backdooring it is actually getting away from our Constitution. It violates our First Amendment rights, it violates our Fourth Amendment rights, and it violates our Second Amendment rights. And it puts actually the municipality at war with the people, because if you can control somebody's speech, their movement, and their ability to protect themselves, you are at war. Those are the three elements of war. So we need to really understand what's going on here. It's not just about speech. It's not just about telling you where you can and cannot go. And it's not telling you like, hey, we need to have more gun regulation because we have a mental health crisis. It's far more than that. It's war. So I need everybody to really just take the time and just understand more about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
It's funny you mentioned that, and I'm kind of projecting this to the audience that I'm in talks right now with Carol Swain. Carol Swain just released a book called The Adversity of Diversity that talks a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. These programs. And then we had the Supreme Court decision that was overturned, the original Bach versus the Regents of California. I think it was the 1978 case about affirmative action. So there's so much going on, and there's so many issues that are interconnected with this idea of diversity and inclusion that I think we have to sort of contextualize and discuss too. So my audience can be prepared for that. Maybe they won't be prepared, maybe they will. I have quite a diverse audience, I will say that much. Pretty globally conscious, but we're going to have different voices on here. I'm not going to have a certain type of voice on here. And someone referred to this as Kiko, it is a leftist podcast. And I'm like, I want to refrain from saying that. I do identify as a leftist, but that don't mean that my guests are going to be that way. I don't want it to be that way. I don't want to be an echo chamber environment. That defeats the purpose of being a free thinker. A free thinker is supposed to be a free thinker. That's what it means.
Yeah.
Is opening your mind to different ideas.
Exactly.
I'm an atheist. Does that mean I'm going to have just all atheists come on my podcast? I mean, that's ridiculous.
No.
I mean, that kind of defeats the purpose. And most of my friends aren't atheists. Most of my family isn't atheistic. So that's just me, but that doesn't have to represent everything about me. You know, I still have to be a part of the world. You know, we're all a part of the world. And so that's kind of the point of the forum, is to let go of the grips of the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is kind of a tool that keeps you in your herd. This forum is to make us communicate with as one, and you can still have your own views and stuff, and maybe you learn from different people. I don't know, but I'm not trying to make you change your views. It's just simply to encourage different ideas. That's all.
Oh yeah, I mean, but that's how this country was made and founded. How do you think freedom of religion got in the how do you think it got in there? It got in there because somebody realized, hey, we're going to have people that believe and we're going to have people that don't. And that's not where they're at, and that should be okay. They got away from tyranny. They got away from slavery. They really, really did. And it's very unfortunate that slavery still followed, right? And it has been a part of our country, but they got away from that for a reason. And if we want to continue to be a free society, we have to buckle down and really dig our heels in and let our politicians know we're not putting up with this. We want our freedoms. Somebody has the right to believe or not. Somebody has the right to their free speech. No, you cannot hear fire in a movie theater and incite violence. You cannot do that. But there are laws in place that say you can't do that, right? But I can't tell you that you're not allowed to have a conservative view or a liberal view. I can't do that because we have freedom of speech. And to your point with hate speech, it's very arbitrary. It's very one-sided. And I don't know what's going on in your head. And you should never expect me to do that. And that's what people are asking you to do. They're basically asking you before you even speak a word, you've got to not, offend me. Are you serious? Like, don't go outside. Don't turn on the TV. Like, I don't know what you're going to do, but interacting with humans is not a thing for you. And guess what? There's a place for you too, but you cannot force someone to do that. If that's where you are, perfectly fine, but you can't force it on other people. That's where the issue comes.
Mr. Ashaki Nichols, I wanted to give you the floor the last minute or so. I just want to say that I've enjoyed this conversation with you again, episode 62. And I was just curious, do you have any final words for my audience? Just any shout outs or any kind of information you think we need to know about?
Yes, again, if you want to volunteer for the campaign, you can visit my website, which is nicholsforpresident.com, and that's Nichols, FOR president.com. We're raising funds right now. So if you want to donate to TPP 2024 and text it to the number 53555.
Awesome. And we would definitely link the Redemption Party and the Nichols for President links in the episode description of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. I wanted to say too to your audience and my audience that this episode 62 will premiere at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern today. And again, that's a way to emphasize the video component more because people are they're raving the videos. And that's great. That's good. And my wife was honestly trying to get me a lot early in the process to you need to really promote the videos because people like to see them. But I got discouraged because I did have a video taken down last year, and I got rid of the YouTube channel for about 3 months, and I think it kind of slowed down the traction. But I gained confidence again. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to let this keep me down, and so it's been a success. And so hopefully everyone considers subscribing for free. Again, it doesn't cost you a dime to do that, and I encourage that for my audience and your audience as well, the international community out there that we're trying to reach. We appreciate you, again, listening, following Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. Consider Ashaki Nichols' campaign. I'm going to link her episode description information there for you so everyone can see it. Ashaki Nichols for President 2024, running under the Redemption Party banner as an independent candidate. And you all can probably anticipate that down the road. I'd like to get 3 interviews from people running outside the duopoly because I feel like people need as much exposure as they can get. And we do appreciate you here at the forum, Ashaki Nichols, and we want to say thank you. And we hope the beautiful people out there watching have a great day as well. Cheers.
All right. Bye, guys.